My name is Hannah, and I'm 26 years old. Life has a way of reshaping us in the most unexpected ways, and mine began with a profound loss. When I was just a child, I lost my parents in a tragic car accident, a day that marked the end of one chapter and the uncertain start of another. With no relatives to turn to, I was placed in an orphanage, a place that, while meant to provide care, could never fill the void left by the love of a family. For 3 years, I lived there, finding moments of solace in the bonds I formed with other children. Then, one day, my life took an extraordinary turn. I was adopted by a couple whose wealth and influence were beyond anything I could have imagined. They welcomed me into their world of privilege, but, more importantly, into their hearts. My new parents didn't see my adoption as a charity act or something to be showcased. They believed sincerely in kindness without the need for applause. Their humility became a cornerstone of the life they offered me, teaching me that true wealth lies not in money but in the values we live by. This is where my story begins, rooted in loss, uplifted by love, and transformed by a family who gave me a home and a chance to redefine what family truly means. As I grew older, my adoptive parents encouraged me to forge my path, even as they provided me with unwavering support. They taught me the value of independence and hard work despite the privileges that came with our lifestyle. When I turned 18, I moved into my apartment, a modest yet comfortable space that felt like a blank canvas for the life I wanted to create. The transition wasn't without its challenges. For the first time, I had to grapple with responsibilities I'd never faced before, managing bills, cooking meals, and finding my way in the world without the constant guidance of my parents. It was humbling, but I embraced it with determination. Meanwhile, all the adventurers and my adoptive parents decided to expand their business overseas. Europe became their new focus, and their trips often kept them away for months. Though I missed their presence, I knew this was their way of living out the dreams they had worked so hard to achieve. During this time, I immersed myself in my studies at university, where I majored in business and finance. I was determined to build something meaningful, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to prove that I could. In these formative years, I first met David, the man who would eventually become my husband, and later, my greatest heartbreak. David and I met during our final year of university. He had a magnetic personality, charming, ambitious, and, above all, kind. Our connection was instant, a spark that feels rare and irreplaceable. At first, our relationship was effortless, filled with laughter, late-night study sessions, and dreams of a shared future. However, even in those early days, I sensed a subtle barrier between us. His reluctance to talk about his family. David came from a prominent, affluent lineage, and it was clear that his family held rigid expectations for his life. Though he avoided the subject, I noticed his mood shift whenever I asked about introducing me to them. For years into our relationship, when we were already engaged, he finally agreed to bring me home to meet his parents. "They can be particular," he said one evening, his voice edged with caution. "They want the best for me," which sometimes means they judge people too harshly. Despite his reassurances, I couldn't shake my unease. I had come to love David deeply, but his hesitancy to share this part of his life with me had always been a lingering worry. By the time I met his parents, Henry and Victoria, my anxiety was at an all-time high. The first encounter was set at an exclusive restaurant dripping with opulence, its grandeur only amplifying my nerves. David and I arrived precisely 2 minutes late, which, as I quickly learned, was an unforgivable offense in his parents' eyes. Victoria barely glanced at me as we sat down, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly as she took in my modest dress. Henry's greeting was polite but cold, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The initial moments were filled with polite conversation between David and his parents. Still, I was deliberately excluded, as if I were an unwelcome guest intruding on a private family matter. Finally, David broke the ice. "Mom, Dad, I'd like you to meet Hannah, my fiancée." His voice was steady, but I could feel the tension in his grip on my hand. Victoria turned to me, her lips curving into a tight smile that felt more like a grimace. "So, you're Hannah," she said, her tone carrying an air of thinly veiled disdain. "Tell me, what does your family do?" Her question caught me off guard. I had always believed that people should be judged by their character, not their lineage. My parents are retired, I replied, carefully choosing my words. They've always supported my choices, and I'm very grateful. Retired? She repeated, raising an eyebrow. Interesting. And how exactly did you afford university? It's not exactly a place for everyone. Her implication was clear, and I felt the blood rush to my face. Before I could respond, David jumped in. She had a full scholarship, Mom. She's brilliant and worked hard for everything she has. Victoria's smile tightened further. How fortunate for you, Hannah, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. The rest of the evening unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Every comment directed at me was laced with subtle insults, every glance a reminder that I was unwelcome. I clung to my composure, refusing to let them see how much their words stung. David apologized profusely as we drove home that night, but the damage had already been done. For the first time, I realized that love alone might not be enough to bridge the gap between me and the world his parents inhabited. The tension between David's family and me only grew after our engagement. I kept the news to myself for months, unsure how his parents would react. Even David seemed hesitant to share it with them. Let's wait, he often said. I want to make sure they get to know you first. But the truth was clear. David was afraid of their judgment. He knew his parents valued wealth, status, and lineage above all else, and I didn't fit their mold of an ideal daughter-in-law. I had always believed that love was enough, but the cracks in that belief widened with each passing day. When David finally told his parents about our engagement, they responded as cold as I had feared. They didn't congratulate us. Instead, they questioned his decision, asking if he had thought it through and implying that I was after his wealth. You barely know her background, Victoria said during a terse phone call with David. Are you sure she's the right choice? Despite their disapproval, David and I decided to proceed with our wedding plans. His parents offered to pay for the ceremony, but only if they could control every detail, from the guest list to the venue. It was their way of asserting dominance, of reminding us who held the power. We'll elope, I suggested one evening, tired of the constant battles. Let's make it simple, just the two of us, David agreed, and though excluding his family and mine hurt, I thought it was the best way to protect our love from their interference. My adoptive parents, still overseas, supported the decision. As long as you're happy, my father said during a video call. That's all that matters to us. The elopement was quiet and intimate, but an unshakable sense of unease overshadowed the moment's joy. Deep down, I knew marrying David wouldn't erase his family's disdain for me. If anything, it would make it worse. After the wedding, the rift between me and David's family became impossible to ignore. Victoria and Henry hosted a grand anniversary party at their mansion, inviting over 100 guests. To my surprise, they extended an invitation to me as well. It's a good sign, David said, though his voice lacked conviction. I spent hours preparing for the event, carefully choosing a dress and perfecting my appearance to make a good impression. But the moment we arrived, it was clear I wasn't welcome. The air was thick with judgment as guests whispered behind their champagne glasses, their eyes darting toward me with thinly veiled curiosity. Victoria barely acknowledged my presence, and when she did, her words were laced with subtle cruelty. I see you've dressed up for the occasion, she remarked with a tight smile. Quite an improvement. The night only grew worse. Conversation seemed to stop the moment I approached, and when I attempted to join in, I was either ignored or met with dismissive glances. Even David, who had promised to stay by my side, drifted away to chat with his parents and friends, leaving me to navigate the hostile crowd alone. Toward the end of the evening, Victoria and Henry gave a speech. At first, their words seemed benign, expressions of gratitude for the friends and family who had supported them. But then, the jabs began. We're so fortunate to be surrounded by people who truly understand the values of success and refinement, Victoria said, her eyes briefly landing on me before darting away. The room erupted in polite laughter, and my heart sank. It was the final straw. I quietly excused myself, stepping outside to call for a ride home. When David found me later that night, his anger was palpable. Why did you leave like that? He demanded. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for me? Embarrassing for him. The word stung. What about how embarrassing it was for me? I shot back. Your parents humiliated me in front of everyone, and you did nothing to stop it? David sighed, his frustration mounting. You could have just stayed. I would have talked to them afterward. And what would that have changed? I asked, my voice breaking. They've hated me from the start, and you've done nothing but let them. For the first time, I saw a side of David I didn't recognize, one that prioritized his parents' approval over my dignity. That night, he slept in the guest bedroom, and for the next week, we barely spoke. The family dinners became a turning point in my marriage with David. He would attend without me each week, returning late into the evening with little explanation. I tried to push down the hurt, but our silence grew louder daily. The man I had once shared dreams with now felt like a stranger. One evening, after a tranquil dinner at home, I confronted him. Do you ever wonder how this makes me feel? I asked, my voice trembling. David looked up from his plate, startled. What are you talking about? You go to these dinners week after week, knowing they don't want me there, knowing how much it hurts. Do you even care anymore? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not that I don't care, Hannah. I just don't know what else to do. They're my family. And what am I? I asked, tears welling in my eyes. Aren't I your family too? David didn't answer. His silence spoke volumes, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't willing to fight for me. Not against his parents, not against their judgment. The final straw came during an impromptu encounter with Victoria. I had gone to the store to pick up groceries when I saw her in the checkout line. She noticed me immediately, her expression a mix of disdain and amusement. Ah, Hannah, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. What a surprise to see you here. Stocking up for another lonely evening, I presume? Her words stung, but I forced myself to remain composed. I'm just here to get what I need, I replied calmly. Victoria smirked. You've always been so resourceful. Tell me, how is married life treating you? Or is that falling apart too? I said nothing, knowing that any response would only fuel her cruelty. But inside, something shifted. I was done being polite, done enduring her insults. When I got home, I found David sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I stood in the doorway, the moment's weight settling over me. We need to talk, I said. He looked up, frowning. What is it now? I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice steady. I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not. Your parents don't respect me, and you don't stand up for me. This isn't the life I signed up for. David stared at me, his expression unreadable. So, what are you saying? I'm saying that if you can't truly choose me, then there's no point in us staying together. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. David avoided me entirely, retreating to the guest bedroom and leaving early for work every morning. I felt the weight of loneliness more acutely than ever, but I knew I had made the right decision to draw a line in the sand. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, my phone buzzed with a video call from my adoptive parents. Their familiar faces appeared on the screen, and I felt a glimmer of comfort for the first time in weeks. Honey, what's going on? My mom asked, her concern evident. You look exhausted. I hesitated, unsure of how to explain. But as their patient expressions encouraged me, the words spilled out in a flood of emotion. I told them everything. The insults, the exclusion, David's unwillingness to stand by me. By the time I finished, tears streamed down my face. I don't know what to do, I admitted. I love him, but I don't want this for my life. My father leaned forward, his expression serious. Hannah, you don't deserve this. You're stronger than you realize, and you have every right to demand respect, not just from his parents but also from him. Exactly. My mom chimed in, her voice firm. If he can't see that, then maybe it's time to step back and focus on yourself. You have us, and we'll always be here for you. Their words gave me the clarity I desperately needed. For too long, I had been trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for me. I had compromised my happiness and self-respect in the name of love, but it was time to reclaim my dignity. Over the next week, I began to make plans. I reached out to a lawyer to discuss the possibility of divorce, a decision that felt both heartbreaking and liberating. My parents, ever the pillars of support, promised to come to town and help me navigate this new chapter. In the meantime, I started focusing on myself, rekindling old hobbies, reaching out to friends I hadn't spoken to in years, and finding moments of joy in the little things. I felt a sense of hope for the first time in a long time. When my parents arrived a few days later, they brought a renewed sense of purpose. "We've got your back, Hannah," my dad said as he hugged me tightly. "Let's show them who you are." The evening of the family dinner arrived faster than I had anticipated. My parents, Edward and Margaret, had flown in the day before, and their determination to support me filled me with a strength I hadn't felt in months. Margaret, my mother, was fiery and protective, while Edward, my father, was calm and calculated, traits that would serve us well that night. As we sat in their hotel room, my father reviewed the plan. "We'll handle the introductions," he said, his voice steady. "You stay composed. Let them reveal their true colors." "I'll try," I replied, though my nerves ran wild. We arrived at the restaurant just as David and his family settled into their private dining room. The atmosphere was as stifling as I remembered, with crystal chandeliers casting harsh light over the table and the low hum of pretentious laughter filling the air. My heart pounded as we approached, but seeing my parents walking confidently beside me steadied my resolve. "Excuse me," Edward said as he stepped into the room. His voice carried an authority that immediately silenced the chatter. Victoria's head snapped up, her expression quickly shifting from confusion to recognition. "Mr. Edward?" she stammered, rising from her seat. "What are you doing here?" Edward smiled politely, though his eyes held a sharp edge. "Good evening, Victoria. I was in town and thought I'd join my daughter and her husband for dinner. I hope that's not an inconvenience." "Your daughter?" Henry repeated, his face paling. "Yes, my daughter, Hannah," Edward said, gesturing to me. "You've met her, of course." The room fell into an awkward silence as my parents took their seats. I could feel the tension thickening, but Edward and Margaret remained composed. Victoria finally broke the silence, her voice laced with feigned politeness. "Hannah never mentioned your connection?" "We weren't aware." My father's polite smile didn't waver. "Hannah values her independence and didn't want her background to influence how you treated her. Unfortunately, it seems that didn't quite work out." "What are you implying?" Victoria asked, her tone defensive. Edward leaned forward, his expression hardening. "I'm implying that you've judged her unfairly from the moment you met her. You've insulted her, excluded her, and belittled her worth, all because you assumed she wasn't good enough for your family." "That ends tonight," Henry attempted to interject, but my mother cut him off. "Let's not play innocent, Henry. Your disdain for my daughter has been loud and clear. But let me clarify. Hannah is more than good enough for anyone, including your son." Victoria's face flushed with anger, but Edward placed a neatly folded envelope on the table before she could respond and slid it toward David. "These are for you," he said simply. David picked up the envelope, his hands trembling as he opened it. His face fell as he scanned the divorce papers inside. "You're divorcing me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I deserve to be with someone who values me, not someone who allows his family to tear me down." The fallout from that evening was swift and far-reaching. My father's reputation as a respected businessman carried weight, and his public association with Victoria and Henry spotlighted their behavior. Word spread quickly, and within days, several of their business partners began pulling out of deals, unwilling to associate with their toxicity. David reached out to me several times after that night, each message with apologies and pleas for reconciliation. "I made a mistake," he admitted in one voicemail. "I should have defended you. Please give me another chance." But his words came too late. Months of neglect and betrayal couldn't be undone with a few apologies. I had spent too long sacrificing my self-worth for a love that wasn't reciprocated in the way I needed. My parents, ever my champions, stayed by my side throughout the divorce proceedings. They not only provided emotional support, but also helped me rebuild my confidence. My mother often reminded me, "You're stronger than you think, Hannah. This isn't the end. It's the beginning." Meanwhile, Victoria and Henry's lives took a sharp downturn. The social circles they had once dominated began to shun them, and their business empire faced significant financial losses. Their lavish lifestyle, built on arrogance and superficial values, crumbled. I found solace in the quiet moments that followed. I spent time rediscovering myself, pursuing neglected hobbies, and reconnecting with friends who reminded me of my worth. Slowly but surely, I began to heal. One evening, my parents and I sat together on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "What's next for you?" my father asked, his voice filled with gentle curiosity. I smiled, feeling a newfound sense of clarity. "I'm not sure yet, but for the first time, I'm excited to find out." After the divorce was finalized, I felt an unexpected mix of relief and sorrow. I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost the life I thought we were building together. Yet, amid the grief, a part of me felt liberated. For years, I had compromised my happiness and self-respect to fit into a world that never truly accepted me. Now, I had the chance to rediscover who I was, free from the suffocating expectations of others. My parents stayed with me for several weeks, their presence a soothing balm for my wounded heart. Ever the optimist, Margaret filled our days with activities meant to reignite my spirit. "Let's try pottery," she suggested one morning. "Or maybe painting. You need something that lets your soul breathe again." Though hesitant at first, I found myself embracing her suggestions. I enrolled in a local art class and was surprised by how therapeutic it felt to lose myself in the strokes of a paintbrush. Each canvas reflected my journey, chaotic, colorful, and ultimately hopeful. In the evenings, my father and I sat in the living room, discussing life and the future. "You've always been resilient, Hannah," he said one night, his voice filled with pride. "This chapter may have closed, but there's so much more ahead. Don't let anyone dim your light." Their encouragement gave me the strength to start setting new goals for myself. I returned to work with renewed focus, channeling my energy into projects that inspired me. I even began volunteering at a local shelter, mentoring young women who had faced challenges similar to mine. Sharing my story with them felt cathartic, and seeing their determination to overcome adversity reminded me of my strength. As the months passed, life began to feel lighter. I no longer carried the weight of trying to prove myself to people who would never value me. Instead, I focused on nurturing the relationships that truly mattered: my parents, friends, and, most importantly, myself. While walking through a nearby park one afternoon, I stopped at a small coffee stand for a drink. The air was crisp, and the vibrant colors of autumn surrounded me like a warm embrace. I heard a familiar voice behind me. As I waited for my order, "Hannah," I turned to see an old friend from college, Daniel. We had shared a few classes years ago and have always gotten, but life had taken us in different directions after graduation. "Daniel, it's been ages," I said, genuinely happy to see him. We spent the next hour catching up, sharing stories of our lives' paths. Daniel had become a successful entrepreneur, running a nonprofit focused on environmental sustainability. His passion for his work was evident, and it was refreshing to talk to someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. As the conversation deepened, I opened up about my recent struggles. To my surprise, Daniel listened without judgment, offering words of encouragement that felt sincere. "You've been through so much," he said, his gaze steady. "But from where I'm standing, you've come out of it stronger." Sometimes, the hardest moments in life lead us to the best ones. His words stayed with me long after we parted ways. Over the following weeks, we began meeting regularly for coffee, and our friendship grew more meaningful. With Daniel, I felt seen and valued in a way I hadn't experienced before. He admired my strength and resilience, and I was drawn to his kindness and integrity. As the seasons changed, so did my life. What had once been a period of heartbreak and uncertainty transformed into something far more fulfilling. My relationship with Daniel grew steadily, built on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of emotional intimacy I had never experienced before. He didn't just accept my past, he celebrated it, seeing my resilience as a strength rather than a flaw. Together, we found joy in the little things. Quiet evenings cooking dinner, long walks in the park, and laughter over stories from our college days. He encouraged me to pursue my passions, even offering to help expand the shelter's outreach where I volunteered. "You have a gift, Hannah," he said one day, watching me mentor a young woman at the shelter. "You've lived through struggles they can relate to, giving them hope. Why not take it further?" Inspired by his words, I began developing a program supporting women transitioning from difficult circumstances. With Daniel's guidance and my parents' unwavering support, we secured funding to launch a series of workshops focused on financial literacy, job readiness, and personal development. Seeing the impact of our work was deeply rewarding, and for the first time, I felt like I was making a real difference. Amid all this growth, I received an unexpected letter from David. It was a simple note, apologizing for the way he had failed to stand by me and expressing regret for letting his family's judgment cloud his actions. "I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you," he wrote. "You deserved better, and I hope you found it." Reading his words, I felt a mix of emotions, sadness for what could have been and gratitude for how far I had come. I replied shortly, thanking him for his honesty and wishing him well. Closure, I realized, didn't always come in dramatic moments. Sometimes it came quietly, through understanding and letting go. The program I had started at the shelter quickly gained momentum, and with Daniel's expertise, we expanded its reach to neighboring communities. Every success story felt like a victory, not just for the women we helped but for myself. One evening, after hosting a particularly successful workshop, Daniel surprised me with a question I hadn't expected. "Hannah," he began, his voice steady but tinged with nervous excitement, "would you consider making this partnership more permanent?" I blinked, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" He smiled, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "In every sense of the word. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at the man who had become my greatest supporter, my partner in every way that mattered. This wasn't just about love. It was about building a life rooted in respect, kindness, and shared dreams. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. 1,000 times, yes. The months that followed were a whirlwind of joy and planning. My parents, thrilled beyond words, helped us prepare for a beautiful, intimate wedding. Unlike my first marriage, this ceremony wasn't about appearances or expectation but love and community. On the wedding day, I felt a profound sense of peace as I stood with Daniel beneath a canopy of golden leaves. The journey that had brought me here, the pain, the heartbreak, the growth, had all been worth it. In my vows, I spoke from the heart. "Daniel, you taught me love isn't about changing who we are to fit someone else's expectations. It's about finding someone who sees us, accepts us, and helps us become the best version of ourselves. I've found that love with you, and I can't wait to build our future together." As we exchanged rings, surrounded by the people who truly mattered, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be.